Hello, everyone, and welcome to the 2025 Hot Topics in Environmental Law Summer Lecture Series. I'm Christophe Courchaine, Faculty Director of the Environmental Law Center and Associate Dean for Environmental and Experiential Programs here at Vermont Law and Graduate School. Each talk in this series is worth 1 Vermont CLE credit, so please keep track of which talks you attend for your records. We'll have time for some Q&A after today's presentation. For those of you who are joining us live on VLGS YouTube, you can enter your questions in the chat space on the right-hand side of the page at any time, and we'll get through as many questions as we can with our speaker today, who we are pleased to welcome, Rodolfo Boix. Dr. Boix is an Associate Professor of Public Finance and Tax Law at Pompeu Fabra University in Barcelona. He is internationally recognized for his expertise in environmental taxation, constitutional tax law, and international tax policy. He teaches courses on public finance, tax law, and environmental law, and has held academic appointments in both Europe and Latin America. Dr. Boix has authored or edited over a dozen books and numerous chapters and articles in leading peer-reviewed journals. His work explores legal and fiscal responses to the climate crisis, the legal architecture of ecological taxation, and the fiscal implications of a circular economy. His recent publications address issues such as the Spanish waste tax, taxation of greenhouse gas emissions, and fiscal tools for promoting renewable energy. He is part of the editorial review board of the forthcoming volume, Critical Issues in Environmental Taxation. He's currently leading the research project, Environmental Taxation and Climate Change, a new tax competence scheme for ecologically and financially more sustainable autonomous communities, hosted at Pompeu Fabra University. He has previously directed projects on environmental taxation and renewable energy in Argentina, as well as on the intersection of customs law and environmental protection, and he's presented his research at over 60 international conferences. Before joining his current institution, Dr. Boix held research and teaching positions at the National University of Cordoba and the University of Murcia. He received his PhD in tax law with European distinction cum laude from Rovira e Virgili University, where he was awarded the Extraordinary Doctoral Thesis Prize. Dr. Boix will join us on campus later next month as a Fulbright grantee for research mobility through September. Today, he will hopefully forgive me for any mispronunciations of anything in his biography, and he'll present challenges of Barcelona's waste tax in light of the new European requirement for pay-as-you-throw systems. Please join me in welcoming Rodolfo Boix.
Thank you very much, Christophe, for your kind presentation. Can you hear me nice, well?
Yes.
Okay?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. Good morning to everyone there, I suppose, and good evening here in Barcelona with a very hot weather right now. And as I said, thank you very much for the presentation, and thanks, Corny, for inviting me to this amazing academic event on hot topics in environmental law. It is a pleasure for me to be part of this summer lecture series. And as you mentioned, next week I will be there in person as part of a Fulbright scholarship program, having the opportunity to visit this beautiful city and this prestigious university and to conduct my research under the supervision of Professor Janet Milne, whom I also thank for her availability all the time. So I am so amazing for this opportunity. And on this opportunity, as you mentioned, I will talk about the waste fee of Barcelona and some regulatory issues. I will share my slide. So could you confirm that, are you seeing the slides?
Looks great, Rodolfo. Thank you.
Okay, perfect. So let's start. Well, as you can see here is the skyline of Barcelona with one of the Gaudi's best architectures and monuments here in Barcelona. Okay, let's start with the well-known polluter pay principles, because during the last decades, this principle has served as a normative standard for several environmental tax reform promoted by the European Union. And among these reform is the pay-as-you-throw system for local waste management, which is presented in the EU regulation as a key mechanism to advance toward a circular economy. And the adoption of this principle within the paid system would be so-called as generators pays principle, for say something. And especially this system was incorporated into the Waste Directive of 2008 that you can see here on the slide, with the modification of this directive of 10 years later, which order member states in the European Union to implement paid system to finance the local waste management. And all of this with the goal of achieving the target set in that directive regarding the waste recycling. Thus, this system have an evident instrument purpose in the sense that they are an instrument, a mechanism for a specific environmental targets proposed by the European Union, but not so proposed, implemented. All this seemed a really great idea, but problems started to arise in some member states. Because, however, although these measures offer undeniable environmental and economic benefits in theory, their practical implementation was neither easy nor positive across all member states as expected in the European Union. The difficulties faced by local authorities are revealing war intentions that go beyond the technical legal sphere, particularly in contexts such as Spain. And when I mention local authorities, I refer to municipalities. And that is why we are talking about Barcelona today, because it is an emblematic case in Spain about this. So the current waste fee of Barcelona, which tariffs depend on water consumption, perfectly illustrates this tension I anticipated. Because while it complies with the principle of economy equivalence required by the Spanish Supreme Court for all kind of fees, it is not completely clear that the essence of this local fee is aligned with the European Union standards. Not because the relationship between the water consumption and waste generation is totally unreasonable, but because the pay system, as are conceived by the European Union, goes significantly further by requiring greater precision in measuring the actual amount of waste and identifying its generator. So despite the technical debate and the many environmental and financial advantages of calculating this fee, a dissonance persists between the abstract regulatory design of the European Union and the social, political, and administrative condition of member states and their cities. So although this study and research focuses on Barcelona's waste fee, the situation reflects what is happening in most of Spanish municipality and in other member states of the European Union, which instead of applying pay-as-you-throw system, rely on several presumptions: water consumption, square meter of the housing, number of residents, location of the household, etc. So all this brought the distance between the Spanish local fees and the European Union regulation. And this dissonance between principles and reality has been analyzed by several authors, as Katarina Pistor in 2018, who points out that legal norms must operate within specific social and institutional ecosystem. So this compels us to rethink the universality of some principles. And in the scope of environmental taxation, that is my scope of research, some authors also highlight the importance of considering the distributed social and political factors when designing fiscal instruments such as on waste or emissions. So considering this, the goal of my research is to determine whether the supranational uniform system, that is the European Union, that seek to impose those pay systems for financing local waste management may generate unintended consequences when applying in fragile institutional contexts, as the case of most Spanish municipalities. So this leads us to question if a theoretical model can work in the same way across such as diverse institutional, social, and cultural realities. If the answer is no, my opinion is, or my hypothesis is that we must reassess the scope of the financial and environmental policies in the UE regarding waste and potentially other areas where similar dissonances arise. So the hypothesis here is that the environmental financial model that the European Union seeks to impose faces several tensions, regulatory tensions, when are applied in some specific contexts, such as the Spanish one. And to support my hypothesis, I analyzed the waste fee of Barcelona, which, despite the city's strong inclination to follow the criteria of the waste directive of 2008, does not seem to meet its demands on this kind of systems. So to address my research goal and my question, this preliminary research is based on contextual and critical analysis, and it is structured and organized into these three main sections, followed by my thoughts and some proposals. First, I review the European Union and Spanish legal framework about the implementation of paid systems in order to clarify what the European Union requires and how Spain has transposed this requirement into its legal system. In second place, I explore the Barcelona specific regulation about the municipal waste fee to assess whether it is aligned with the national, the Spanish legal system, and the supranational standard, the European standards. And third, I analyze the tension arising from the discrepancies identified in the previous two sections. So let's start with the European and Spanish regulation for the implementation of those systems. Because with the circular economy in mind, the directive of 2018 that you can see here introduced the obligation for member states to implement pay systems to finance the management of municipal waste in the countries. In Spain, this obligation calls into question most local waste fees as they are often calculated based on indirect indicators and presumptions. This directive of 2018 is based on the Circular Economy Action Plan of the European Union of 2015, which led to a legislative package intended to review the waste regulatory framework of the Union. And after intense and long parliamentary negotiation, the directive was finally transposed into the Spanish legal system through this Law 7 of 2022 on circular economy. This national legislation has direct fiscal consequences for all Spanish municipalities on waste management financing because it establishes a specific deadline for the implementation of those pay systems, April of 2025. Yes, this is not a mistake. 2025, 3 months ago, was the deadline. It must be noted that in Spain, the responsibility for financing local waste management lies with the municipalities and is their local regulation and not the national or the regional one. Nevertheless, all such pay system implementation must comply with the frame of the national and supranational regulation. So as we can see, all the regulations are linked in some sense. And through the law on circular economy, this national Spanish law of 2022, Spain transposed the West Directive, which ultimate goal and purpose is to improve recycling rates among member states, especially in those countries like Spain, which has been warned several times by the European Union about the risk of non-compliance with the targets set by the European Union. Among other commitments, supranational reports warning Spain about the urgent need to implement pay system for local waste management. On this slide here, you can see the official percentage for each member state in 2022, along with the average for the European Union. And remember that the goal is to reach the 55% by 2025, so this year. But this data, this official data of the European Union website is from 2022, and Spain is indicated by the red arrow with 42.9%. And right now we are in 45%. So we are far away from this 55% required by the European Union. And like other municipalities, the city of Barcelona is currently constrained by both the European Union regulation and the national legislation, with their specific deadline and standard about those systems. In this regard, Annex 4A of that European Union directive talks about waste fee based on the real amount generated, as well as implementing incentives and benefits for source separation and reduction of mixed waste. The directive thus took an initial step toward the use of this kind of systems without providing further details. Once the European Union committed to pay system implementation, it had to choose between two main alternatives. The first one is offering a general definition of such system, leaving member states free to determine the specific details. The second one is regulating every single detail, eliminating any regulatory discretion for all member states. As shown by Annex 4A, the Waste Directive chose the former option, providing just a simple notion of pay system. And this represents a problem because this lack of detail led some member states that are facing practical difficulties in applying pay system to adapt their regulation to their own social, institutional, and political context. And the Spanish regulation, it is a clear example of this, because the way the law on circular economy, this Spanish law, regulates the implementation of pay systems appears misaligned with the European Union requirements on these systems. Specifically, see the wording of this Spanish law, which requires municipality to literally establish a fee that enables the implementation of pay system within 3 years of the law's entry into force, that is April of 2025. But what does this mean? What does enable mean here? Although Spanish regulation adopts in some sense the European Union definition of pay system, the way it frames the local obligations raises several questions. Because the Article 11 of the Spanish law on circular economy does not really require the establishment of pay system, but instead requires the adoption of measures that enable the implementation of pay system. This is very similar to the European Union requirement in the West directive, but not quite the same. As a result, it remains unclear what is actually expected for municipalities in Spain by 2025. And some scholars here in Spain, like Herrera Molina, 3 years ago, uh, stated that it's very suspicious that this wording contains a calculated ambiguity by the Spanish lawmakers aware of the challenge for local entities facing this European Union requirement. So, given the limited time frame, 3 months ago, uh, you have to take into account that the law was for 2022, so 3 years until April 2025. This is a limited time frame for municipalities to develop this huge new system. The Spanish Ministry of Finance was forced to clarify its regulation with a very rare interpretation, confirming the earlier suspicions. Especially, the ministry states that the regulation does not impose an absolute obligation to enforce a fully individualized fee for each taxpayer in April 2025. Rather, this system should be gradually incorporated. After that, also explained that local authorities must gradually and progressively incorporate elements that take into account taxpayer behavior in waste generation, allowing not only systems that enable individualized fees, but also others that offer incentives for some ecological behaviors. That was literally the interpretation of the government. So while this government interpretation implies a relief for Spanish municipalities, it also implies a concern to European Union institutions because in some sense dilute the original European Union mandate and the European Union intention with the directive of 2018 that reformed the directive of 2008. So if we see that under the European Union regulation, pay systems are based on a technical and normative logic that presupposes certain preconditions, well-resourced local administration with advanced management capabilities, citizenship willing to accept those environmental tax mechanisms, compliance culture that enables their gradual implementation, among others. The problem is that not all member states meet these preconditions. The case of Spain demonstrates this clearly because it had to draft an ambiguous law and interpret it in a way that fits the reality of its municipalities, taking distance from the European Union's original intentions. These are the tensions I anticipated in my introduction. And authors such as Richard Beard in 2010 have noted that the success of the decentralized tax system depends on institutional context with administrative capacity. And in practice, these preconditions are far from being met uniformly across the European Union territory. And Spain is not the exception here. Barcelona is a good case to demonstrate this. The implementation of pay system requires measurement technology, consolidated databases, complex billing system, public communication, education mechanism, etc. Added to these are cultural and social barriers, such as public distrust toward local taxes and political resistance to potentially unpopular measures. The West Fios Barcelona clearly illustrates how the European Union's model for harmonizing environmental tax measure can clash with national context and local territories in this case. This gap between theoretical design and effective implementation invites reflection on the convenience of the regulatory generalization within the European Union. The attempt to harmonize environmental taxation across member states cannot presume that a one size fits all solution will work in such diverse realities. So, in my opinion, a more prudent approach would help to consider the institutional, social, and cultural differences, recognizing that shared environmental goals could be achieved through different paths. So let's move to the next point, the local regulation of Barcelona's waste fee, which is currently regulated by Fiscal Ordinance 3.18. It is collected through the water bill. It was first introduced in 2019, so not so much years ago, with no changes until the current fiscal year and does not appear to change for next year either. So the current tensions with the European Union standards become a matter of crucial scientific interest for us. The fees charged for the service of collecting household municipal waste, thus excluding urban waste from industrial and commercial activities with another financing model. Taxpayers here are the holders of a domestic potable water supply contract. However, fiscal ordinance establishes several exemptions and reduction with either eliminate or reduce its fiscal burden. So these tax benefits are organized on both social and environmental considerations. From a social perspective, the ordinance exempts holders under residential exclusions, and in addition, it establishes reductions from 5 to 50% depending on the number of occupants, the degree of disability of the residents, and their economic and social situation again, but from a different view. And from the environmental perspective, the ordinance only offers a reduction from 1 to 14% for taxpayers that use one of the several recycling points spread alongside the city. You can see here this green map of the city of Barcelona with those clean points. And the percentage from 1 to 14% depends on the number of uses during the year by the taxpayers. The complication of this system is to control those uses in an effective way. So as you can see here, the fee is calculated depending on the type of household classified by letters A, B, C, D until A, or and within each category according to the monthly volume of consumed water measured in cubic centimeters. So the collection of the fee is carried out through the water service bill, which facilitates and guarantees revenue collection for the municipality. And since its initial regulation in 2019 of this fiscal ordinance 3.18, its designers have been totally aware of the changes required by the waste directive for municipalities 1 year ago, 2018. Indeed, the own preamble of this fiscal ordinance explain a two-phase plan, although no specific timeline is provided. The current stage is transitional and involves a fee directly linked to water consumption. And during the second and future stage, they declares the designer of that fiscal ordinance declares that this link between water consumption and waste generation have to be revised in order to design the fee based on each individual behavior in generated and separating waste. That is under a real pay system. Mm, all this appears to be a declarative steps toward aligning the municipal fee with higher level regulation, but without a specific uh, timeline of implementation. And these two phases represent an explicit recognition that the current financing model for waste collection of the city of Barcelona does not meet the European pay system requirements. And rather than reflecting the specific polluting activity, it relies on the waste generation and water consumption relationship. In the last point of this three section of my presentation, I will analyze the tensions between the European Union, the national and local regulations. Because to determine the real amount of waste and the individuals who generate it, the academic literature agrees that pay system must include a two-part tariff, a variable component in the tariff joined with a fixed component. The first component is based on actual data to reflect the real and actual amount of waste and its producers. That is the most complicated part. And the second one is based on estimated data to cover the fixed cost of the local waste management. Water consumption might be a valid standard to design a fixed component, just like housing size or number of residents or any other. But maybe it is not convenient or fully convenient for determining the non-fixed component. The connection between the water consumption and the waste generation seemed to be a little bit weak and indirect without fully encouraging waste reduction and recycling. So the waste fee of Barcelona represents one of the first local attempts to meet the goals of the updated waste generation, as we see in its preamble. However, compliance with its requirements remain aspirational. While a future system based on real waste generation is projected, no timeline is defined, and the current mechanism relies on domestic water consumption. That is why I refers to an aspirational declaration in the own fiscal ordinance. While the fiscal ordinance itself recognizes the directive's targets and anticipates a more precise second phase aligned with the pay system, it also admits that the current fee is misaligned. So there is a recognized need to transition toward a more ecological model, but there are no clear means or political consensus in the city to achieve that purpose. The institutional context of Barcelona and the majority of Spanish municipalities explains some of its limitations and tensions. The use of water consumption based model reflects not only a lack of technology to measure the real waste generation, but there is also a political decision to implement a simple system using existing billing mechanism, avoiding greater social and technical resistance. So we can state that despite the two-phase plan of the fiscal ordinance, the Barcelona waste fee does not meet the European Union criteria on pay system. This local case highlights not only the technical complication of an improvised solution, but also the, the tension between the imperatives of the European Union harmonization and the real capacities of the local administration to comply with them. Designing a realistic and effective pay system in Barcelona cannot simply involve copying the German or the Dutch model. It must consider the local institutional and social features, the level of informality, the culture of compliance, the administrative capacity. Those features are very different from German and Netherlands, for instance. Tax systems must engage with institutional realities in which they are established. Ultimately, member states are the ones which best understand their own realities. So here are my preliminary thoughts and conclusion in this research, because on the one hand, we have shown that despite its statement to try to align with the Waste Directive of 2008, the waste fee of Barcelona does not really meet the criteria imposed by the European Union regarding those systems. The supranational regulation requires a financing model based on real waste production and generators, but not on presumed data, as the water is in our fee here in Barcelona. Furthermore, the European Union warning reports confirm that Spanish municipalities, including Barcelona, had not yet adopted this model and were not expected to do so by April of 2025. The last warning report was from 2024. And the projection are that in April of 2025, the goals were not committed. In fact, the own preamble of Barcelona fiscal ordinance recognizes that for now, this fee cannot be considered compliant with supranational standard, but there is a plan for be compliant in the future. But on the other hand, we have also demonstrated that this fiscal ordinance is really consistent with the Spanish national law on circular economy. This law requires municipalities to establish a fee that enables the implementation of pay systems. Later, 2 years later, the national government clarified that this provision implies a gradual implementation of this system by 2025. So the ordinance recognizes that the current fee represents an initial step towards the future implementation of a real pay model in line with the recent interpretation of the ambiguous wording of the Spanish national law. So this suggests that the fiscal ordinance is consistent with this gradual implementation approach interpreted by the Spanish ministry. So here there is a problem or a question, because if Barcelona fee appears to comply with national law in Spain, but not with supranational regulation in the European Union, then the core issue is on the lack of coordination between the national and supranational regulatory levels. It seems that national law has either failed or even chosen not to fully reflect the requirements of the European Union. The supranational frame opted not to provide detailed guidance, but instead to define pay system that member states are expected to adopt. This lack of specificity allows some member states, such as Spain, to transpose the directive content in an ambiguous way, to adjust the fee to their social, institutional, political, and economic realities and, and local features, at the cost, obviously, of undermining the uniformity alongside the European Union. But if member states are using this vagueness to dilute the directive requirements, we must question the effectiveness of this generic regulatory approach of the West Directive. Does this make sense? Is my question. It seems the answer is no. To avoid this scenario, the European Union has two main alternatives. The first alternative is to regulate pay systems in greater detail, ensuring that member states clearly transpose their content and guarantee the uniform application. And the second alternative is to avoid mandating the specific instruments that member states must adopt to meet the European Union's environmental goals. In my opinion, the second option, that is to avoid mandating the specific instrument, appears more suitable as avoids the type of tensions demonstrated in this research, in this preliminary research. In fact, more detailed regulation, that is the first option, will surely exacerbate this tension that we are observing right now. It could be much more appropriate for the European Union to set environmental target, for instance, the 55% recycling rates for 2025 or the 70% for 2030, for instance, and allow member states to freely choose the specific instrument to achieve those target and ecological purposes. This would allow them to adopt measures much more compatible with their particular social, institutional, political, and economic conditions and features, and to ensure that those measures are effectively implemented into their territories. It is important to note that this does not exempt member states from complying with the European Union ecological targets. When a member state fails to meet those targets, the European Union may impose economic sanctions. Therefore, member states will seek the most effective and appropriate ways to achieve this supranational environmental goal. In the end, what truly matters to the European Union is that its member states meet those environmental goals. In short, I can state that the case of Barcelona shows that for supranational regulations to avoid those tension between regulation and reality, or unintended effects within member states and their local entities, the European Union should focus on defining the general environmental targets, while allowing the member states to freely choose the specific measures through which they will achieve those targets, adapting them to their own social, institutional, political, and economic realities. So, in the same way that Gaudí, this famous architect of the Sagrada Familia in Barcelona, adapted the form of his buildings and architecture to the anatomical structure of animals, the European Union policies should be shaped in accordance with the institutional and structural features and particularities of each member state. So we have here Gaudí saying thank you for recycling in Barcelona, and I say thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Rodolfo. That was wonderful, and a fascinating uh, case study. We're a really challenging problem with solid waste and how to manage it. We're confronting that very much in the United States as well. We have some time for a few questions, and I wanted to remind those watching live that you have the opportunity to put your questions into the chat box on the right-hand side of the page, and I'll share them for our discussion. To kick us off, though, uh, one of the sort of questions that occurred to me during your talk is based on your research and based on thinking about this. If you think about the context of Barcelona and you think about all the unique attributes of that city and its culture and the way that people interact with waste and think about their trash and recycling and what would be the ideal next step as this moves from a transitional fee to something that's more individualized or household based that talks that really does achieve these goals of these programs, which are really to incentivize reductions in solid waste, not necessarily reductions in water use. How do you see that, from the perspective of Barcelona? What would work in your context?
That is a real good question because I am telling you, in my opinion, what does not work. So the question is, what could really work here? First of all, I want to say that the case of Barcelona represents the cases of all the principal cities in Spain because Sevilla in Andalusia in the southern part of Spain, or Madrid, Valencia, Bilbao, all those cities uh, relies the waste fee on those presumption and indirect indicators. So maybe the problem is the same. So maybe the solution could be the same because we share the same culture, we share the same features, and we don't share the same feature than Dutch cities or German cities. We are very different, even than we are in a small space called European Union compared to the United States. And we seem to be a real union. We are very different, so different, especially the southern part compared to the north part, the northern part of the European Union. So first, first of all, we need environmental education. Is the first thing that we need because some part of the population is not prepared for that. Some part of the population maybe will through the waste in outside the city with the car just for not paying this waste fee. If we use the pay system controlled by an electronic car, putting your name and the weight of your waste, all will be very controlled. So here the people don't want to be controlled and prefer to go with the car and to throw the waste outside. So maybe we need ecological education, and then here works a lot incentives, the other side of the environmental taxation. We can um, encourage, we can discourage activities and we can encourage activities. So the Barcelona waste fee took an important step with those clean points spread in the city. And that is a good idea and it is working right now. A lot of people is going to there. And in Catalonia, is the region where Barcelona is the capital, we are trying a very small scale of the paid model in a town of 10,000 people only population. Maybe we need to make some proof in a smaller city during 2, 3 or more years to 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 reflect that in biggest city. So the biggest cities are not prepared right now for that kind of model.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if I am answering your question. It's not easy your question because of the local authorities are question themselves on that.
Can I ask you also, as some of these municipal programs are piloted and considered, um, how politically and governance, in terms of governance, how do those programs get designed, and who are the participants in that process? Is it an um, a open public process, or is it a more top down from the municipal government? How does that evolve? It's in the United States, one of the aspirations that we have is often to have a very um, uh, democratic approach to design of these types of systems at the local level, even though there are state laws and national laws about solid waste. And very frequently, I've observed in a state like Vermont, which I'm excited to welcome you to, is very small. Like that 10,000 number is a large would be a large town in Vermont for sure. There aren't too many of them, and so smaller towns actually get together. There's smaller municipal units, and they, um, have to manage these issues themselves. And so you oftentimes get a small group of citizens who sort of start working with their local government on solid waste issues, and become the authorities. They become the um, sort of people that are looked to for ideas and plans. And oftentimes these plans get filtered through them, and they are often, you know, volunteers. They're not municipal employees, and they're working with the municipal authorities to make it happen. Um, in Spain or in Barcelona or in maybe in one of these pilot communities, how are those decisions about the structure of these programs being made?
Thank you very much because it is another really good question, a key question in this issue, and maybe it has two parts. The first answer could be who designed these European Union targets, for instance. Obviously, all the state members participate in those decisions, but right now, after the pandemic, there is a big amount of money that the European Union is printed and spread within the states, the member state, but with a condition to accept all the not only ecological but also economic politics and measures. So it is maybe a way in which the northest part, northest countries in the European Union pressure the southest countries, exchanging measures by money in some sense. And so we have that kind of pressure. Spain is the national government is pressured by the European Union because if you need funding, you need to do these legislative changes, and then is the Spanish government is pressured by the local government, the regional government, because they don't want that kind of measures because they don't actually receive the money that came from the European Union. And the other answer it could be if the citizens participate in that kind of debates and decisions in a local scope. And the answer is similar than the previous one, in the sense that we also need political education, because the people don't want to participate, because those problems are from the politicians, from the partisans, will not impact on me. So this is a very big mistake. And then when the measure arrive, all the people is complain about that measure, but the people who have the possibility to participate, because we here have the possibility to public participation and opinion before taking a local measure, but the people uh, don't use to participate. But then the concern, the complaints arise anyway, but the people were not informed. The people need more political education in some sense. Maybe it's the key education, environmental education, political education, for the people be aware that those measures impact have a direct impact on the citizenship.
Um, I think we're close to time, but I wanted to ask one more question, which is that we're in a sort of tumultuous time in terms of policy in the United States, as you may be aware, and we're sort of thinking hard about the different places of government where we can continue to sort of promote environmental advancement and progress. And we oftentimes look to local and state governments to take up the mantle when the federal government in the United States steps back. What's your perception of the way in which this type of policy, which has been, in the works and being implemented over the last decade or so, is there momentum behind that, behind this policy of reducing waste, addressing this aspect of our environmental challenge, certainly a big part of the climate challenge to address our waste streams and promote recycling, avoid landfilling of various types of materials or incineration of different types of materials. Do you feel momentum behind those policies that are, in some sense related to the momentum we thought we had about 10 years ago at the time of the Paris Agreement, where, we felt like the world was moving in a similar direction, maybe differently in each country, different pace, different types of goals, but some momentum. But on this issue, do you feel a momentum or a stalling as your country as well as the European Union are trying to tackle this challenge among others?
And do you ask me my opinion on your country or the European Union or
Yeah,
both?
I think the most interesting thing to me is sort of whether you see that momentum continuing in the EU. We can have some discussion over over a beer about exactly what's happening over here when you arrive, and we can chat about that. I do think that it's very interesting to our audience to sort of understand whether there's still a momentum in the EU from your perspective around this issue of waste and managing it.
Before the pandemic, the ecological issues were the priority, undoubtedly. After that financial crisis of 2008 and 2012, between 2012 and 2020, the ecological issues were a priority, and that was joined with normative change, like all these, the European Union Green Deal, and a lot of movements on that direction. But the pandemic changed, the pandemic and the wars into the European Union with Russia. Israel is not European Union, but it's very close, and all the economic consequences behind the pandemic and the wars are changing that priority, not only in politicians but also in the citizenship. That now here the people is much more worried about the economy and the security, and maybe are the other order. the security, because a possible third world war, and then the economic consequences. So it's not the first time that we see this, that when the economic and the war is in peace, we can think on environmental issues, environmental measure, and the war coming greener. But when other topics arise, we used to put in second, third, or other place environmental issues, and that is the, the agenda right now in the European Union. And a lot of partisans are taking advantage of this and are trying to put another priorities, because they are aware that the people has are right now another priorities, and the people are the votes.
That is for sure. You have to have the support of voters in any country with a democratic form of government, and we've seen some interesting changes here in terms of the electorate's views and priorities as well. But I think we're out of time for today's talk. I want to, express our appreciation, Rodolfo, for your outstanding presentation and sharing with us the sort of issues around waste tax and in Barcelona. For our audience, thanks for joining us today. We are next week, which is the week of the July 4th holiday in the United States. VLGS will be closed for summer break. We will be restarting our series on hot topics on Tuesday, July 8th. And I hope to see you then. And thanks everyone for joining.
Thank you very much again for the invitation, and I hope to continue this debate in person in Vermont, because I have a lot of questions also.
Wonderful.